The scientists of the 1800s look at these remains with a mixture of horror and awe. They aren't looking at a myth. They're looking at a crime scene from the past. For the first time, humanity is forced to confront a terrifying reality, that a creature can exist for millions of years and then, because of us, be wiped off the face of the earth forever. The discovery of these giant skeletons in the 19th century wasn't just a scientific breakthrough. It was the moment we realized we were capable of destroying nature itself. To understand the dodo, we have to look back long before the sailors and the ships. Imagine the Indian Ocean 4 million years ago. A massive storm, a cyclone of unfathomable power, sweeps across the waves. A flock of Southeast Asian pigeons is caught in the gale, battered and exhausted, flying thousands of miles off course. They spot a tiny green jewel in the vast blue, Mauritius. When they land, they find a world that is nothing short of a biological miracle. It is a volcanic island, rich with fruit-bearing trees, lush ferns, and crystal-clear streams. But most importantly, it is empty of predators. There are no cats, no dogs, no rats, no snakes. There is nothing that wants to kill them. In this vacuum of fear, evolution began to take a strange, experimental turn. For thousands of generations, these pigeons lived in a state of absolute safety. In the world of biology, flying is expensive. It requires massive amounts of energy, heavy muscle, and a high-calorie diet. If you don't need to fly to escape a predator, why bother? The dodo's ancestors stopped flying. Their wings, once powerful enough to cross oceans, began to shrink. Their chest muscles softened. Their bodies, no longer constrained by the weight limits of flight, began to expand. This is the phenomenon scientists call Island Gigantism. The bird grew into a giant, weighing upwards of 50 pounds. It became a ground dweller, a slow-moving, peaceful inhabitant of the forest floor. This is where the myth of the lazy dodo was born. To the sailors who would later find them, the dodo seemed stupid and sluggish. But in reality, the dodo was a masterpiece of efficiency. It had evolved into a state of ecological innocence. It didn't have a fight-or-flight response because there was nothing to fight, and nowhere it needed to fly to. It was a creature of pure peace, living in a world where the concept of a threat simply did not exist. The dodo spent its days wandering the groves of the tambala coke tree, eating fallen fruit and stones to help its gizzard grind the seeds. It was a symbiotic relationship. The tree and the bird grew together, a perfectly balanced machine of nature that functioned for millennia in total silence. The suspense of the dodo's history lies in the collision between this innocence and human greed. The silence of Mauritius was shattered in 1598 when a Dutch fleet under Admiral Wybrand van Warwick was blown off course. When the sailors stepped onto the white sands of the island, they were starving, scurvy-ridden, and desperate. They walked into the woods and encountered a bird the size of a turkey, with a massive, hooked beak and tiny, useless wings. The most shocking part? The bird didn't run away. It walked right up to them. It looked at these men, creatures with clubs and blades, with a sense of curiosity. It had no frame of reference for cruelty. The journals of these 17th century sailors are haunting to read today. They describe Valgvogel, the disgusting bird, so named because the meat was tough and oily, yet they killed them by the hundreds, not because they were good to eat, but because they were easy to catch. One sailor wrote about how a single man could kill dozens of birds in a single afternoon, simply by hitting them with a stick. The dodo, in its final days, would watch its mate be killed and stay by its side, not understanding that it was next. It was a slaughter of the innocent, but the physical killing was only half the story. The 1800s researchers, as they analyzed the layers of soil in the swamps, found evidence of a much more subtle and sinister invasion. When the Dutch ships arrived, they didn't come alone. They brought black rats in the holds of their ships. They brought pigs and monkeys as livestock. These animals were the true executioners of the dodo. The dodo, having no fear, laid its eggs directly on the forest floor in simple nests of grass. To a ship rat or a feral pig, these eggs were defenseless gold mines of protein. While the sailors were hunting the adults, the invasive species were eating the future. The dodo was being attacked from both ends of its life cycle. It was an invisible war that the dodo was never equipped to fight. Within decades, the population collapsed. The bird that had survived volcanic eruptions and massive climate shifts for millions of years could not survive a century of human contact. By the year 1681, the dodo was gone. It vanished so quickly that by the 1700s, many people in Europe began to think the dodo was a myth, a tall tale told by drunken sailors to amuse people in bars. This is why the 1800s discovery was so pivotal. Those photographs of the skeletons served as a memento mori, a reminder of death. When the Victorian public saw the reconstructed bones of the dodo, it sparked a cultural obsession. Lewis Carroll put the dodo in Alice in Wonderland, turning it into a symbol of something that is dead as a dodo. The bird became the face of extinction. For the American and Canadian audiences of the time, who were witnessing the expansion of the frontier and the vanishing of their own wild spaces, the dodo was a cautionary tale. It was the first time we realized that the world was finite. If you look closely at the photographs taken during the 1865 excavations, you can see the sheer scale of the dodo's beak. It was a powerful tool, capable of crushing hard-shelled nuts that no other animal could open. This suggests that the dodo wasn't just an accidental giant. It was a specialized engineer of its environment. When it disappeared, the entire ecosystem of Mauritius began to fail. The tambalacoke trees stopped germinating. The forests began to thin. The loss of the dodo wasn't just the loss of a single bird. It was the pulling of a thread that began to unravel an entire tapestry of life. The mystery that remains, and the suspense that drives modern scientists, is the lost image of the dodo. Because the bird went extinct before the invention of the camera, we only have drawings, many of them second-hand or exaggerated. Some show the dodo as a fat, bloated clown. Others show it as a sleek, powerful runner. The 1800 skeletons are the only objective truth we have. They tell us that the dodo was much more athletic than we thought. It was a survivor. It was a king of its domain. Its only mistake was living in a world that wasn't ready for the arrival of the most dangerous predator of all, man. As we move into the deeper history of these bones, we find stories of the last dodo. Legend has it that a lone bird was seen on a small islet off the coast of Mauritius in the late 1600s, staring out at the ocean as its world crumbled around it. What was it thinking? Did it feel the loneliness of being the last of its kind? The 1800s explorers felt this weight. Every time they pulled a bone from the mud, they were touching a piece of a world that would never return. They were the first generation to feel extinction guilt, a feeling that haunts us to this day as we look at our own changing climate and the species we are losing now. As the mid-1800s progressed, the discovery of dodo bones in the Mare Ossange swamp triggered what can only be described as dodo mania in the scientific circles of London, New York, and Montreal. The skeletons weren't just biological specimens. They were the most sought-after relics in the world. Collectors from American museums, including the early precursors to the Smithsonian, scrambled to get their hands on even a single toe bone or a fragment of a beak. There was a haunting realization among the Victorian elite. The dodo was the first high-profile victim of the modern age. In an era where the United States was expanding west and Canada was forging its national identity, the dodo stood as a grim ghost at the banquet, a reminder that progress often came at the cost of total annihilation. The photographs taken during this era, those grainy, high-contrast plates, show scientists in top hats standing over tables of bleached white bones. In these images, there is a palpable sense of suspense. It was as if they were trying to perform a seance, hoping the bones would speak and explain how such a magnificent, strange creature could simply vanish, but the bones held their secrets tight. One of the greatest mysteries that the 1800s researchers faced was the shape of the bird. All the paintings from the 1600s showed a bloated, bumbling, almost comical creature. This reinforced the idea that the dodo was lazy and stupid, an evolutionary mistake that deserved to die. However, when the 19th century anatomists began to assemble the skeletons, they noticed something that didn't match the art. The skeletons were sleek. The legs were long and powerful. The structure of the pelvis suggested a bird that could move with surprising speed through the dense undergrowth of the Mauritius forests. This created a scientific controversy that lasted for decades. Was the dodo really a fat, lazy bird? Or was that just a caricature drawn by sailors who saw them in captivity, overfed on ship biscuits? The suspense of this mystery lies in the realization that we may have spent 300 years mocking a bird that was actually a finely tuned athlete of its environment. The 1800s photographs of these skeletons provided the first real evidence that the dodo was a victim of bad press, as much as it was a victim of human hunger. Among all the relics found in the 1800s, none are as haunting as the Oxford dodo. This is the only specimen in the world that contains soft tissue, dried skin, and feathers still attached to the bone. Its history is a dark thriller in itself. Originally part of a museum in London in the 1700s, the specimen had become so moth-eaten and decayed that the museum directors ordered it to be burned. At the last second, a horrified curator reached into the flames and pulled out the head and the right foot. To this day, when you look at the photographs of the Oxford dodo, you are looking into the face of an extinct world. The skin is wrinkled and leathery, the eye sockets are empty, but the DNA remains trapped within the cells. For the American and Canadian public, this mummy of the dodo became a symbol of what science could and could possibly do. In the late 1800s, people began to wonder, if we have the skin and we have the bones, can we bring it back? This was long before the discovery of the double helix or the invention of cloning, but the seed of de-extinction was planted in the Victorian imagination. They viewed the dodo not just as a lost animal, but as a challenge to human ingenuity. If we were the ones who destroyed the dodo, were we also the ones who had the moral obligation to resurrect it? The suspense surrounding the dodo's final days was further deepened by the discovery of sailors' journals from the late 1700s that had been lost for generations. These journals described the ghost of the island. Sailors who landed on Mauritius long after the dodo was officially gone reported hearing strange, deep booming sounds coming from the interior of the jungle, sounds that mimicked the calls of the giant pigeons. They reported seeing tracks in the mud that looked like no other bird they knew. These cryptid sightings in the 18th and 19th centuries fueled the hope that perhaps, somewhere in the unreachable volcanic crags of the island, a small colony of dodos had survived. It turned the island of Mauritius into a place of mystery, a lost world, where the rules of extinction might not apply. However, as more explorers combed the island in the late 1800s, the reality began to set in. They didn't find living birds. They found more graveyards. They found layers of earth where the dodo bones were mixed with the bones of pigs and the shells of invasive snails. It was a forensic map of a disaster. The laziness of the dodo was actually a tragic lack of preparation for a world that had suddenly become globalized. The dodo didn't know how to compete with the rats of Europe or the monkeys of Asia. It was a specialist in a world that was suddenly demanding generalists. This brings us to the most modern chapter of the dodo's story, a chapter that would fascinate any North American audience interested in the cutting edge of technology. Today, in laboratories in the United States, scientists are using the very bones found in the 1800s to sequence the dodo's entire genome. They are looking at the genetic code of the Nicobar pigeon, the dodo's closest living relative, and trying to see if they can edit its DNA to recreate a dodo. We are living in a time where the suspense is no longer, will we find a dodo, but will we build one? But even if we succeed, the philosophical question remains. What kind of world would a resurrected dodo live in? The Mauritius of the 1800s, where the bones were found, was already vastly different from the paradise the dodo knew. The forests were cleared for sugarcane, the native trees were dying, and the climate was shifting. To bring a dodo back today would be to bring a ghost into a world it no longer recognizes. This is the ultimate tragedy of the dodo. It isn't just that the bird is gone, but that its home is gone. The dodo was part of a delicate clockwork mechanism of nature, and when we broke the bird, we broke the clock. If you visit the great museums of New York, Toronto, or Ottawa today, you might see a cast of a dodo skeleton. It stands there, frozen in a stride, its large beak tilted upward as if it is still looking for the fruit of a tree that no longer exists. There is a profound silence around these exhibits. It's a silence that speaks to our own fears. In the 1800s, the dodo was a curiosity. Today, it is a mirror. It shows us what happens when a species becomes too comfortable, too lazy in its own security, and fails to see the storm clouds on the horizon. The photographs of the 1865 excavation at Mauritius remain some of the most important documents in the history of science. They are the birth certificates of our environmental consciousness. Before those bones were pulled from the mud, humanity viewed the earth as an infinite resource that could never be exhausted. The dodo taught us that the earth is fragile. It taught us that forever is a very real possibility when it comes to loss. For the audience in the USA and Canada, countries with vast wildernesses that are now under threat, the dodo is the ultimate cautionary tale. As the sun sets over the island of Mauritius today, the swamp at Mauritius is quiet. The researchers have moved on. The bones are in climate-controlled cases thousands of miles away, and the dodo is still dead as a dodo. But the suspense hasn't faded. Every time a new species is added to the endangered list, the ghost of the dodo walks again. It reminds us that we are the stewards of this planet, and that once the last egg is broken, once the last giant falls, all the technology and all the 1800s photography in the world can't bring back the heartbeat of a species that just wanted to live in peace. The dodo wasn't a failure of evolution. It was a success that was interrupted by a disaster it couldn't see coming. Its laziness was actually a profound trust in the world, a trust that we betrayed. And as we look at those old, faded photographs of the bones found in the 1800s, we aren't just looking at a bird. We are looking at our own history, our own capacity for destruction, and our desperate, ongoing hope for redemption. The story of the dodo isn't over. It is a ghost story that we are still writing every single day.